Shalom. First and foremost, before I get started, I want to give all glory and honor to Yahweh, Bashim, Yahushai, Bashim, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders at Great Millstone who teach and were well. Peace and salutations to the Lord's elect and the 1/3. On the brother Barak. Lord willing, this will be another edifying lesson. And I just wanted to make this about, lesson about doing the work, And this includes, talking about these people out there that don't want to do the work of the Lord, man. This is the book of Luke 9:62. And Yahushua said unto him, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of Yahweh. Right? So what does that tell you? You can't just do the work, stop, and then just forget about this thing. Because the thing is, man, there's nothing better. What else would you be doing, man? Honestly, what else would you be doing? Right? There's a couple of guys that we know. We tell them, hey, bro, can you show up to the call? Hey, hey, you want to do a lesson? And they're fucking playing Roblox, man. Fucking Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, just fucking around, man. What the fuck are you doing, man? Playing Overwatch, playing, fucking Minecraft. Man, like, what the fuck, man? You don't got time to be playing fucking video games, man. What else are you going to be doing, man? Spending time with your woman. You can make a 10-minute lesson, right? But you're out here fucking, you can spend more time doing, just hanging around with your woman watching fucking TV, right? And, can't even do the work, man. Right? That's why the Lord, he doesn't give certain men, he might not give certain individuals a woman because it might be like a burden unto them, right? This is the book of 1 Corinthians 7:29, and it says, but this I say, brethren, the time is short, it remaineth that both they that had wives be as though they had none, right? So, even if you have a wife or children, whatever the case might be, you still got to remember, that you're in the truth, man. You have to continue to do the work. You can't use that as an excuse to take a month off, right? 3 months off, because everybody has 24 hours in a day, right? And I know damn well a lot of these people they spend an hour scrolling through YouTube Shorts, spend another hour on fucking Instagram, right, playing games. And mind you, though, these things, everything, you can have a balance with them, sure. You don't have to, completely avoid them, right? But, with this man's society, it's kind of difficult to avoid them, right? But, these, you have to put in time for, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, man, even doing, a simple lesson. It doesn't have to be that long. It can be 10 minutes, man. But you're saying you don't have time for, to feed the flock, right? To do the work of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, It just goes to show where your mindset really is. You put all these other things first, right? And, you see a lot of people, they put, they might put, say God first. God is my main priority, right? But, where are your fruits? Are you really? Are you really doing that, right? You talk about it. You talk about, the fruits, right? You talk about, works, right? But then when it comes time to do it, you start making excuses, start being a fucking sluggard, right? And, don't get me wrong, I like playing games, I like watching, TV from time to time, right? But, you have to do the work, man. You can't let these worldly things, man, distract you, man, because everything else is just a vain thing, right? It's not too important, right? Because, when those nuclear missiles hit, man, when shit hits the fan, man, you ain't going to be thinking about that thing. Yeah, you're going to be thinking about getting the fuck out of here, right? You know, so you know, you got to start keeping, you got to start keeping you know, keeping you know, being steadfast, right? You know, you can't just be out here, you know, doing all these random different things, right? You know, you can't do, and then you know, you forget to do a lesson, and then you maybe tomorrow, right? And then you maybe tomorrow you miss that day too, and then maybe next week, you know, and even, you know, there's, you know, Brother Selah and I, you know, we host, you know, calls, right, where, you know, we're doing lessons, and you know, we'll have calls, right, and you know, we you know, we have, you know, some individuals, right, that you know, say, you know, yeah, you know, I'll show up, man, you know, I'll show up, and you know, 3 minutes in, man, you leave the call, man, you know, in mid lesson, you know, what the fuck are you doing, man? You know, what else could be so possibly more important, you know? We know that there's certain, you know, distractions and stuff, you know, whatever, but you know, don't show up at all, man, if you're gonna just, you know, if you know, this ain't no participation trophy thing, you know, you do the work, man, because the Lord sees everything, man, you know, you can't just fucking half-ass it, man, right? This book of Revelation 3:16, it says, but then, because thou art lukewarm, neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth, right? So either, you know, you're in or you're out. That's it, man. You're not, you know, on the fence, right? You know, because a lot of people, man, they're on the fence about what? Their doctrine, right? Their, you know, their, you know, the names, right? The, you know, their belief about, you know, some people believe, you know, the heathens aren't going to make it, and then they switch up, and then they start saying that the heathens are going to make it, which is completely bugged out, man. You know, and you know, the thing is, man, you can't be, the same thing applies to you know, doing the work of the Lord, man. You know, you can't just, you know, show up every fucking 3 months, you know, and just fucking you know, just you know, just post post something on, you know, here and there, and then, you know, disappear, right? You gotta push, you gotta do the work every day, man. You know, you gotta do the work as much as you can, you know, and that's why you know, Elder Apostle Tahar, you know, he put out an order. I believe there was like a weekly quota about, you know, videos, right? And the reason why, you know, the elder apostles tell you, you know, you have to meet this requirement is because, you know, they want us basically to you know, shoot past our you know, potential, right? You know, and that's why the scriptures say what it says in the book of Baruch 4:28, for as it was your mind to go astray from the Lord Yahweh, so being returned, seek him 10 times more. Right? So, you know, we do this because what? You know, you might fuck up, right? And you know, you seek it 10 times more, you go past that, you know, what you thought you were capable of doing, right? You know, that's why we keep the, you know, the other apostles, you know, they tell us, you know, keep the bar higher, right? You'll post more lessons, right? You know, repost other brothers' videos, post more precepts, whatever the case might be, you know. And ultimately, you know, the thing is, man, you know, you people, man, you know, you just are full of fucking shit. You're just full of excuses, man. You know, you know, you take advantage of the Lord's mercy. You know, it really goes to show you where your mindset is, you know. And a lot of people, man, you know, they truly don't believe what's about to go down either, you know. Because if you really thought shit was about to hit the fan, you would be trying to warn everybody, you know, everybody what's going to go down. But you're over here fucking playing video games, watching TV, and, you know, spending hours talking to women, right? You know, I know damn well if, you know, a pretty woman came up to you, you know, you spend more than 10 minutes in, you know, hanging out with them, talking to them, in bed with them, So, you have no excuse to be, just sitting around doing nothing, man. It's these people, man. They're just sluggards, right? That's what the scriptures say. What consider thy anti-sluggard, right? And ants, right? They prepare videos, so like they prepare their food beforehand, right? So even if something's gonna, you might be busy, or whatever. At least prepare videos, in advance, right? You don't gotta talk about things that are too complicated for you either. We can repeat the same things, right? It, if you don't have understanding something, don't make a video about it, right? But you should just stick to the milk. We don't have to, we don't have to, leave that to the elder apostles, man. Leave that to the elders that teach them real well. We don't have to, you don't have to, dive into a bunch of, topics that are too far of your understanding, right? And don't use that as an excuse to, not do the work. You can repeat things, and that's cool, man. We can repeat these things, right? Because we're trying to feed people the milk. We're not trying to, we're trying to warn them about prophecy, If there was a cliff, right in front of somebody, you saw them walking off a cliff, and they didn't know, what do you want to tell them, right? Our people, we have to warn our people, man. Because our people are out here in the world, they're lost. They don't fucking care, right? So we're trying to feed the flock, until before the shit hits the fan, and then there's gonna be a famine of the word, and then you'll have nothing. You'll have nothing to show the Lord, what works you had, right? You want it because the thing is, man, people think we're just gonna be able to do this forever, and that's not true. There's gonna be a time where we're not gonna be able to put out any more videos. We're not gonna be able to, we're not gonna be able to put out videos. There's not gonna be no more YouTube, no more, even a lot of Bibles are starting to get banned right now in certain countries, bringing them in, right? I believe it was Canada and Nicaragua. I believe Canada had made something illegal about saying certain scriptures, and in Nicaragua, I believe they banned actual Bibles from entering into the country. I believe that's what it was, right? So we're not gonna be able to do this forever, man. I don't, even if you're sick, right? Because a lot of people, they use that being sick as an excuse, because they like feeling that feeling of like, what is it? They like feeling of things being done for them. That feeling of not being able to be responsible or do anything. You still got to do the work, man. You can walk, you can talk, you can still push out a lesson. You have no excuse to just not do the work, man. It's just crazy. People out here will come up with any fucking excuse, to talk about their woman, right? Talk about, their job, talk about, fuck, man, they broke their foot, broke their arm. You people are full of shit, man. Yeah, and then you see that same guy playing video games, a few hours later, right? What would the Lord think of what you're doing, man? What would Yahweh Hashem Yahushai think of what you're doing? Anyway, with that being said, I'm gonna give all glory and honor to Yahweh Ba'Hashem Yahushai Ba'Hashem Rakak Shalom.